Vítejte u další epizody podcastu o investicích do nemovitostí ve Velké Británii. Dnešní díl je výjimečný. Poprvé je celý vedený v angličtině. Mým hostem je totiž Andrew Marshall, zakladatel společnosti AMRP Relocations a zkušený správce nemovitostí v severní části Velké Británie, nebo Anglie, tam, kde se i moje vlastní správcovská firma pohybuje. Andrew má pod správou přes 250 nemovitostí svých klientů, investorů a sám vlastní přes 30 investičních nemovitostí. V rozhovoru sdílí pohled člověka z praxe na zásadní změny, které přináší tzv. Renters Reform Bill. Je to návrh zákona, který v příštích měsících dramaticky může změnit pravidla pro nájmu v Anglii. Tento zákon se pořád odkládá, ještě není jasné, kdy začne platit, už se o něm mluví dlouhé roky, ale zřejmě je na spadnutí. Probereme, co přesně se mění, co to znamená pro vlastníky nemovitostí a proč by měli zpozornět i čeští a slovenští investoři, kteří spravují nemovitosti na dálku, nebo kterým my spravujeme nemovitosti na dálku. A teď už pojďme na rozhovor v angličtině. With over 250 tenancies under active management and a personal portfolio of 30 plus properties, today's guest knows the UK rental market like few others. Andrew Marshall is the founder of AMRP Relocations and Buy-to-Let Advisory Services, a trusted name for landlords and investors across the northeast of England for nearly 2 decades. I am Adam Wojna, and through my company we manage UK rental properties on behalf of Czech and Slovak investors primarily, many of whom are now asking, what exactly does the Renters Reform Bill mean for us? In this episode, Andrew and I break down the biggest overhaul of the UK rental sector in a generation. We'll look at what's changing, what's still uncertain, and how landlords, especially those investing from abroad, should respond. Whether you own one property or the whole portfolio, you'll have this episode with a clear, real-world understanding of what's coming and how to stay ahead. Andrew, welcome to this podcast.
Thank you very much, Adam. Thank you for the invite. It's a pleasure to join you.
You started 2 decades ago. What actually made you to, start the property business?
Yeah, do you know, it's an interesting story. I was in my early 20s, nearly qualified as an accountant, and I walked past an estate agent every day on my lunch from work. And at the time, I could buy a property at around £20,000. So, still living at home, still with my parents, still studying. But I worked out I could raise a loan, and believe it or not, I raised a personal unsecured loan via Tesco,
Okay.
which allowed me to buy a property. No mortgage was available at that level, far too, too low a value. So unsecured loan from Tesco, bought the property, did a little bit of work, managed to find a tenant, and remortgaged a year later, and the property had doubled. Now I have to say that was lucky timing, probably not good management at the time, but that funded 2 more deposits, and the whole sort of portfolio building journey went from there. To the 35 properties I've got in a portfolio now. But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily recommend anyone start their portfolio with an unsecured loan, but it worked for me in 2002.
Yes. How would you start today? Would you use the same financing, or would you go to, different way? How would you do it today?
I think for me, I think really ideally someone would have some funds to, does that make sense, to bring to the investment strategy so that they're able to put some deposits into financing. I did an event about this just recently. I think certainly people would have some money to bring in terms of finance, in terms of funding, and then carefully look at their strategy in terms of finance with their broker. Usually, what I'd say, Adam, is people need to think about what their exit is and why they're investing, and that should drive their financial strategy. So, to give you an example, I now have all of my properties on repayment mortgages over the next 20 years, so that eventually one day I can slow down and retire. So
That's unusual, because
that's
I
my
heard
plan.
that the majority of the landlords, they have interest-only mortgages.
Yes, they do. And I'll be honest, until pre-COVID, so did I. But as you can imagine, from 2002, when I was 22, now we're a bit older, I guess aspirations change. My outlook on life changed. My outlook on investing has changed. So I started to switch pre-COVID to repayment because what I acknowledged is I need an exit point. And my way to do that is obviously to have those 35 properties mortgage free.
Yeah.
At the age of 60 to 65, that's the plan that I'm driving towards. And at that point, I'll have some real choices about work-life balance, about do I work, about do I sell them all and retire to a cruise ship? It will give me some options. And I really encourage investors to think carefully about does that make sense? What their individual plan is, what are they trying to achieve, and how can we do that for them?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I agree with you. And I noticed that I started with interest-only mortgages as well, and I wanted to be as leveraged as possible. But once my 40s approached, I
Yeah,
started changing my mind. And myself and my wife, we are just thinking about, repaying everything we can. If we repay all our investments within, I don't know, 10 years, then that'll be fine. And we definitely want to go approach this retirement age
yeah,
with debt free. And then we will see what the exit strategy will be.
absolutely. I
Yeah.
think with age and mindset, risk attitude can change, can't it? Which is why I say to every client I speak to, it's like, right, you need to engage accountant, mortgage, you need to build your own strategy because risk appetites are different, aren't they? And people have different backgrounds, different aspirations. So it is an individual plan in my mind, but it sounds like you've got a really solid plan there that you're working to, so that's good to hear.
Yeah. And it's always changing.
Yeah.
Andrew, how
Yeah.
would you explain the renters reform bill to someone who owns one or two rental properties and isn't following UK politics?
So yes, absolutely. What I would say, you're right. Opportunities and threats. In the 20 years I've been in private rent, I've seen, there's been numerous changes. Interest rates have been extremely favourable, and they were very unfavourable for a period of time, and that brought its own challenges. Um, there's been changes in benefits that have affected tenants. Lift cost of living crisis. I mean, the list goes on, doesn't it? But as landlords, we are business owners, and we're constantly flexing for different and new challenges. I think that's just the reality of operating a business.
That's right. Yes. Is it completely different, today's market to the one when you started 2 decades ago?
Yeah, I have to admit, I mean, as an agent, the world has completely changed, the requirements that are placed upon us. I won't say that 20 years ago, we didn't have to do anything as landlords and letting agents, but, the sheer amount of legislation and things that we had to get
Yeah.
right, monitor, check, evidence, because I always say evidence is the key. It's almost not what you do, but what you can evidence.
Okay.
Um, because
Yeah.
the day you end up in court trying to evict a tenant, saying you've done to a judge all these things is not sufficient. It is about evidence. So yeah, that world for me as a landlord has changed a lot. It's not something that can't be tackled, but it does require, you know, real planning and preparation, and there's an element of change management at the moment because if renters' rights are
Yeah.
going to be advocated in a positive way, we have to plan and make some moves now, basically.
Yeah, we have CP12 or landlord gas certificates. We have electrician certificates that's valid for 5 years. What else do we have? We have obviously we have houses with multiple occupation where the law is, more strict. It's different.
Hmm.
Now they are talking about Section 21 that actually might disappear in the future. And yeah, let's dive into it and tell us what is the biggest change for you. What in your opinion, what you think is the biggest change?
Absolutely, yeah. And just to sort of come to the beginning of the process, Adam, briefly, I think for me, the preparation that needs to be taken starts pre-tenancy. So the eviction changes and the different experience landlords are going to have at course, if landlords wish or need to evict. For me, that all starts pre-tenancy and ensuring a tenancy is, well, initiated properly and legally correctly. So some of the documents you mentioned are actually, you're quite right, those are documents that have to be prepared. But what we find is things like, has a landlord correctly recorded the tenant's right to rent pre-tenancy commencement?
Yeah.
If that isn't done, your eviction case won't get to court. It will be thrown up before that. Was the tenant's bond correct? protected correctly is another one we see landlords trip over all the time. If it's not protected properly in the right timescale with the right documents,
Yes.
it doesn't even get to court because the pre-court process washes that away. Your eviction will be in real trouble at that point. So certainly as a landlord, what I'm now working on is adapting now. Does that make sense? And making sure my pre-tenancy work, the way I find tenants, vet them, and who I offer tenancies to, and the documents I prepare. It's all prevention, as I would call it. So there's a lot of prevention work that's being undertaken to make sure the tenants that we give tenancies to now, we're building those tenancies to be bulletproof. Should there be a problem later, that we're in the best possible position to sort of navigate the new eviction world.
You actually made a presentation, a quite long webinar that lasted a couple of hours, and we'll put the link under this video or podcast. So anyone who's interested in more depth of this topic, they can click on the link and see your webinar.
Absolutely, that would be, yeah, you're quite right. Listeners would need a few coffees for that one, I think, Adam. It was a lot longer.
Okay.
And we went into a lot more detail about the changes and preparations and things that landlords could do in anticipation. I think you're right in what you said. We always, like Adam, it is the next challenge that landlords are going to face. But I think it's really important. Yourself and I, we're helping and guiding landlords, and
Yes.
We're here really to develop strategies to make the best of it. This is a challenge. There is some negatives for landlords, but I think our role is to help landlords achieve the best possible outcomes.
That's right. And what do you think is the main the biggest change that actually surprised you?
Yeah, so I know I've got on the presentation there. The removal of the Section 21 route
Okay.
to eviction is, and this is the one that hit the press. This is the one that had landlords were really fearful. So the press's sort of perception of it was, no landlord was ever going to be able to evict a tenant again on a no-fault basis.
Yeah.
So this is the one that really got landlords quite concerned. Now, what I would say, when you read the hundreds of pages of legislation in the Renters' Rights Bill, it's not an exciting read, Adam, but actually what the legislation does, it removes the current Section 21 route to eviction, but it does give landlords a whole host of new ways and reasons to evict a tenant. And what I would say, all the reasons landlords evict tenants, it's usually maybe a problem with rent payment, or hopefully not, but hopefully if the tenant was causing antisocial behaviour or sort of misbehaving in some way, if the landlord wants to sell, if the landlord wants to return to live in the property. So there are a number of legitimate reasons, and actually what the legislation does, it creates new routes for landlords to legitimately evict tenants using, does that make sense, using these new routes to
Yeah.
eviction? So whilst it takes away the old Section 21, there are replacements.
And the Section 21, just to remind the listeners, means that you could actually evict the tenant without giving them the reason.
Basically, exactly that. Yes.
It was 2 months notice at any time.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
And you're quite right. No reason was needed to be given. And I think in the press, there's this perception that landlords run around evicting perfectly good tenants almost for the fun of it. Now, I must have managed thousands of tenancies over 20 years, and I've never worked with a landlord who has not evicted for a fair and valid reason. 99% of the time, it's because the tenant isn't managing their rent account properly, or they don't look
Yes.
after the property correctly. You know, I'm sure you'd agree, Adam, most landlords want stable long-term
Yeah.
tenants who,
Yeah.
who've made a home. And if that's the case, landlords are very happy for those tenants to remain where they are. An eviction isn't an issue. So the positive in the legislation is, if you're a well-meaning landlord who just wants tenants to make a home and and live there as long as they wish to do so, then actually renters' rights isn't something to be concerned about. But what I would say, there are various preparations landlords should make in terms of, what I would suggest is the tenants you select, how they're referenced, is something my agency is. We've done a lot of reshaping work on that. So how we reference and select tenants,
Hmm.
how we move them in the paperwork that's prepared and issued to tenants, that needs to be thought about. And the other big suggestion I would make, Adam, something we're implementing, is rent guarantee insurance.
Okay.
Okay, so we're proposing that our clients look at rent guarantee insurance products. And the reason being, most of those products, if a tenant fails to pay, that product will kick in and will pay the rent to the landlord. So that is a huge benefit. But the other big benefit, this is very much tied to renters' rights because whilst landlords will have ability to evict tenants, what is quite clear in renters' rights is it's going to be a much longer process.
Okay.
So the 2 months notice is gone. And now what the renters' rights says is tenants have to be in more arrears. So it used to be 8 weeks of rent. That amount has gone up. The amount of notice we have to give a tenant has increased.
Hmm.
And we suspect the court process is going to be slower and long. And it's not very efficient to start with, let's be honest. So there's suspicion the court process will become longer. So the process to evict a tenant legitimately was slow already. But there is well, it is true. That process will become even longer. So the
Hmm.
reason we suggest rent guarantee insurance, God forbid if as a landlord, if you have to evict a tenant, if you have rent guarantee insurance, that product will kick in. So as a landlord, you're receiving the rent and you
Yeah.
continue
I
to
have I
the
have this
process.
product. I have this product myself, but
Ah,
once I had bad tenant and I wanted the product to kick in, but there was a problem because I hired estate agency in Liverpool that actually didn't do the job properly when moving
okay.
the tenant in, and there were a whole bunch of documents missing. They didn't
Wow.
give it to the tenant, like
Okay.
their their rights and stuff about the deposit protection and all that things. So the tenant didn't have it. We went to the insurer and the lawyers said actually there is less than 50% chance to win this, so we are
Okay.
not touching it. And I was like, okay. So I lost probably 4 months of the rent. And when the tenant moved out, the property was in really bad shape. So it
Okay.
actually cost me about, I don't know, 10 grand, something like that, to put everything together.
And I guess you would have been paying for that insurance product as well, wouldn't you? You know, you would have been paying for that product and then not
Yeah.
had the benefit when you needed it. So
Yeah.
that, do you know, it sounds like a horrific experience, but
Yeah.
it's a point well made, Adam. And this is why, as an agent, we're working with our partner who provides the rent guarantee insurance, and
Yeah.
we've built our tenancy processes to match their requirements, which is really designed to avoid the problem you've experienced.
Yeah.
So we're working to make sure we work within the requirements of the rent guarantee product to
Okay.
make sure if there's ever a claim, we can give that company everything they need. The claim is valid, and our clients would benefit from it. So it's a really good example there, Adam. That sometimes, as I've said, the work landlords can do to protect themselves starts even before a tenant gets the keys. And actually, that's almost the most important part of the process because, as you've experienced, Adam, if something isn't right or is missed, the problem can come much later and it can be difficult to fix later. So, sort of pre-tenancy work is prevent rather than cure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, if a landlord wants to sell a property or move in themselves, how easy will it be to regain possession under the new law?
Yeah, so there are routes for eviction for exactly that. Um, the only problem or concern again is timescale. So what the bill does, it extends the amount of notice that landlords have to give to tenants if they want, to move back in or to sell the property. So in effect, the position landlords are in is they have to give tenants a longer notice period.
How long?
It actually doubled, so it's 4 months.
Okay.
Yep, so it's doubled. If the tenant doesn't leave voluntarily, then we're in the court system, and as we've talked about it, we know that the court system's hugely inefficient now. I mean,
Yeah.
you may have experienced this, Adam. I mean, in 2025, we have to prepare three sort of paper packs to evict a tenant, manually post them, and send a check. I only own a checkbook for evictions. Who else is operating with checks nowadays? So it's a hugely administrative process already. And
Mhm.
one of the very disappointing things, funny enough, the former Conservative government had said they were going to sort of reform the court process. They were going to digitise it. It would
Yeah.
become online. Funny enough, that's disappeared. That's disappeared from the Labour plan. Renters' rights is going ahead, and the court system won't be reformed and modernised. And this is where one of my concern comes in. When a landlord has a genuine problem tenant and needs to evict, that streamlined court process would have been extremely helpful.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, what we're going to be left with is the current system, which is paper driven, very manual, very slow, and we suspect will probably get worse.
Do landlords need to rewrite existing tenancy agreements, or will everything be covered automatically?
The We suspect we won't be issuing new tenancies, but and again, this isn't confirmed at this point, so it's something to watch. What has been suggested is there'll be a document that sort of transform the old tenancy into the new, so there'll be some kind of conversion document that agents and landlords have to issue, but that is not yet confirmed. This is it, as you know, Adam. It's a sort of ever-changing position.
Yeah.
I did the webinar a couple of weeks ago, and there's some tweaks that have been made since, so it's something to keep an eye on. But certainly, I know as agents, and you and I, we'll be watching that, won't we? And we'll look after our customers and sort of do whatever's required at the time.
Yeah. And what are some practical steps landlords should take now to get ready before the law changes?
Yeah, absolutely. This is the key, isn't it? I know you're right, Adam. I will make the recording available from the last event, and I really tried to focus on exactly this.
Yeah.
What's going to happen and what can landlords do? So for me, I think there are a number of steps. Certainly, as you've experienced, I can't stress enough pre-tenancy. Prevent rather than cure.
Yeah.
Select the right tenant. Be absolutely sure that the tenancy is initiated correctly and all the paperwork that should be issued is issued correctly at the right date, at the right time, in the right way, because that is what a judge expects of a landlord. So that is a big one. Tenancy initiation work must be
Yeah.
absolutely correct. That is a huge one. We are asking or recommending landlords look at the rent guarantee product that we've talked about, but there are other options. We're offering our landlords bond replacement schemes.
What is that?
So if a tenant perhaps struggles to fund the bond up front, so there are insurance products. The tenant pays for this. The tenant would pay for an insurance product, but it's actually for the landlord's benefit. So it's another way of protecting landlords in effect.
Okay. By bond, you are referring to the deposit?
A deposit, yes.
Okay.
Different terminology. Apologies.
Yeah. It's okay.
Yeah, yeah. So I would call it a bond deposit often, but so yeah, some of our tenants won't pay a cash bond up front.
Yeah.
They pay a fee for an insurance product, which our landlord benefits from. The
How
reason
much is the fee?
it's usually 1 week's rent.
And the fee is paid how often?
Annually.
Annually. Okay.
Okay. So it's more cash affordable to a tenant, but the reason we like it, you probably know yourself, Adam, but deposits and bonds are restricted to the value of 5 weeks' rent.
Yeah.
Now, as you experienced with your problem tenant, 5 weeks' rent, I would suspect, was nowhere near the £10,000 that the tenancy cost you. So this actually came in 2018 with the fee ban. So bonds being restricted to 5 weeks has been with us for quite some time. The reason we like the insurance product, it actually gives more monetary cover than 5 weeks. So in effect, basically landlords have more cover if there's a problem at the end of the tenancy.
So if the tenant actually doesn't have the cash to pay for the deposit and they pay the insurance, which costs around 1 week's rent and they paid annually, the landlord is covered more than 5 weeks of the deposit?
Exactly that, correct.
And do you have any idea what's the upper amount?
That's most of the products are a double in effect the 5 week. That's most products offer that.
Right.
We
Okay.
have a specific, but what I would say, Adam, again, this is where everything, and again on the longer webinar, when everything sort of comes together. So
Yeah.
to benefit from the bond replacement product, it's offered alongside. It's the same company and the same partnership as our rent guarantee product. They have
Mm-hmm.
similar requirements. Does that make sense? So it all wraps together sort of this work about thinking about how tenants is initiated and the paperwork that's done. It's a journey, shall we say? But if I can just mention, Adam, the other thing that we're asking landlords are really encouraging to look at is property condition. So in terms of inspection regime, how inspections are documented. So we have a specific piece of software that my team use that documents a property's condition in great detail. So there's hundreds of pictures, there's a video of every room, and it's a real in-depth assessment of the condition of a property. And the reason we're suggesting that, the bill gives tenants a lot more rights around disrepair. So if a property isn't looked after correctly, again, it's another problem that a landlord could have in terms of evicting. So if a tenant is able to evidence any amount of disrepair and you try and evict, you would encounter problems. So again, we're looking at prevention. So what we're saying to landlords is certainly if landlords are managed by agents like you know ourselves, I'm sure solid eviction sort of schedules are in place. But maybe for self-managed landlords who don't go and see their property, we're really saying, look, you need to commission a detailed inspection of the property, and you need to document it so that if you ever end up in front of a judge trying to evict your tenant, you have that sort of solid, robust evidence of the condition of the property to defend yourself. So property condition is the other thing we're really asking landlords to carefully look at, in effect to protect themselves as these changes happen.
Andrew, do you think that this bill will actually improve the rental market, or will it create new tensions in the landlord-tenant relationship?
Sadly, I often say when I speak to landlords, we don't necessarily have to agree with legislation, but we are here to comply with it. I have to be honest, I don't necessarily think it will improve the outcomes or the sector. It creates new challenges for landlords. But conversely, one opportunity we haven't discussed for investors who are looking to perhaps enter the buy-to-let market or increase their portfolio, these changes are pushing some landlords to exit. So, if you're a landlord who's looking to expand your portfolio, there are some really great opportunities at the moment to pick up properties that landlords wish to sell with tenant, with rent flow on day one. So I think it's driving movement in the market, if that makes sense. Some landlords will decide it's the end of their journey and they'll want to exit. But something we do a lot of it in my business is we will tie those selling investors with investors who want to start their journey or want to grow their portfolio. So I guess it's like everything. There are threats and opportunities.
And do you feel that there are landlords who have one or two properties, or do you feel like those are actually vanishing from the market, and new landlords, or not necessarily new landlords, but those who would like to stay in the market, they're actually growing their portfolios?
Do you know, I see a real mix at the moment. When I speak to, people are saying to me, oh, everyone's going to leave the private rented sector. But actually, there's a real strong appetite from new investors. Does that make sense?
Yes.
To start their journey? What I would say about landlords with smaller portfolios, I always feel one property for me is the most riskiest position to be in that,
Yeah.
if your one tenant doesn't pay, you have zero rent. I often say to investors, if they're going to invest, in my opinion, they should they should look to work towards maybe 10 properties. The reason being, if you have a problem with one property, the rest of the portfolio would probably pick up the slack and cover it.
Yeah.
We find landlords with one, two, or three, if they have a boiler that needs replacing, or they have a tenant problem, or they have some expensive issue that happens, they can have real problem because they don't have financial cover. So I often say to people, if you're going to do this, work to a bigger number that will give you some cover and some coverage. Small numbers of properties can bring some risk.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying to my clients as well, because as you know, I work with investors from Czech Republic and Slovakia, and they approach me and they say, Adam, I would like to buy one property in the UK, one in Spain, one in different country, and I'm like, are you really sure that you want to learn all those legislations and the tax problems and implications and everything? The culture is important as well. In 3 countries, right? I know it is difficult for me to learn those things in one country, only in England. And I'm not saying, I'm not even mentioning Scotland or Ireland, where the market is completely different as well.
Yeah, and Wales has a very different rental sector as well. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's not worth, diversifying portfolio that much. I think that if you diversify your portfolio, when you earn, for example, because they ask me, how many units do you think is good before I start diversifying the portfolio? And I'm saying, it's not usually about units, but if you have 2 or 3 units, okay, then it doesn't really matter. But I would say it depends on the income that the properties are generating. And if properties are generating, I don't know, 2,000-3,000 pounds after all the costs, then I would be thinking about diversifying the portfolio. But, I wouldn't go, I wouldn't have one property in Manchester, another one Newcastle, third one in London. No, I would have 3 properties under, similar postcode,
Absolutely.
similar area, and then I would move to different part of the country, and then I would move to different country altogether. What's your view?
I entirely agree. I mean, what I would say, I'm lucky enough to have a lettings manager and a team who work on my behalf. And like you, Adam, legislation changes like this, it's a real challenge, isn't it, to sort
Yeah.
of keep up. So, and that's in one location. So absolutely, I think becoming a specialist in a location and probably you're right, a particular geography, maybe, maybe develop a love for Newcastle or Sunderland or Durham, and get to know that postcode and get to know the areas that you want to invest in. Become a specialist, understand that location and get the contacts around you, the letting agent and the maintenance team.
Yes.
I think you're right. There are other ways to diversify. So we have some clients who they'll buy some cheaper properties, some smaller two-bed terraces. They'll buy some HMOs. They might buy commercial, and sometimes that's how people achieve diversification. With different property types, but in the same postcode area.
Yeah, absolutely. This
Yeah,
is a good point.
yeah.
Do you expect more landlords to use full property management services because of this legislation?
Probably like you, Adam. Certainly that's something we're advocating.
Yeah.
I mean, as I said, let's be honest. Most self-managed landlords have another life, another career.
Yes.
They have families. They need to have downtime, and I think. If you're a self-managed landlord with a company, trying to navigate, even the current legal system, let alone the system that's to come, is almost impossible. Extremely, extremely difficult. So,
It's
as
not
you
worth
know,
it.
Adam, like you, we do a lot of education work for landlords.
Yeah.
Trying to educate them and make them aware of what their responsibilities are. Um, but you're right. I absolutely think landlords will have to see the value that an agent brings. The protection it gives a landlord having an agent involved and,
Yeah.
what an agent can add to their journey.
Yes, and we actually, Andrew, we met because one agent actually went bankrupt, and my clients had properties with them. I'm not going to mention the name; it doesn't
No,
really matter at the moment. But that was really interesting to watch, to be honest, because my clients were investing through them, and every week I had some issues on my desk with the agent. I was like, that's impossible. And then this thing happened, and they are probably bankrupt now. I'm not sure now, but I'm definitely sure that a lot of people left them
yes,
because they discovered that everyone was treated really poorly. Every property was in really poor condition. And when my team visited those properties, they just couldn't believe, what was going on there. And
yes,
this is how we actually met because their clients set up the WhatsApp group and someone referred the people to your webinar and I
absolutely.
was there myself. And this is how I contacted you. So
Yeah, and
that
do you
was
know, Adam, I will say, sadly, obviously, I know the sort of agent and the journey that you're describing, but that isn't isolated, and I think this is probably why agents in the industry get a murky reputation. So, sadly, that experience you've described isn't. We see this time and time again from landlords who talk about
okay.
poor experience, common problems we see from landlords, poor communication from their agent, not being kept informed and up to speed, lack of transparency.
Lack of transparency, that was the biggest issue because,
Yeah.
my clients, they are 2,000 kilometers, 12, 1,300 miles away from their properties. So the trust must be on really high level. And
Absolutely.
with this agent, when they don't communicate, the trust was, through the floor. So it was
Yes.
really, really poor.
No. So I
And
actually did, funny if I actually did another I have a whole recording that we will share with landlords who perhaps want to join us, where we talk about some of the common problems that landlords face with other agents and how we choose to tackle them. But you're right, it revolved around usually poor communication, a real lack of transparency and sort of being open, and that leads to distrust usually. So, through software and through access and being able to share.
Yeah.
This is how we counter that and build. What I always say to my clients, the nearest property in my portfolio is 500 yards from my home address.
Okay.
However, I have not visited that property internally for 12 years. Because I use the systems that are in my letting agent, so I can see the condition from the 6-monthly inspection report. I can view a video of every single room. Does that make sense? I can log on to my and I can see the tenant's rent account, every certificate. So I treat myself as a client of my own agency products, so don't visit my own properties. And I say, whether my client is me 500 yards away or 10 miles, 50 miles, or in a different country, frankly, with the technology that's available in 2025, we can deliver that transparency.
Absolutely. And it's easy and it's cheaper as ever. I remember when I started first my business in 2008, I was doing property management in Manchester, and at one time I had 100 tenants, and that was a real challenge. But even back then we had Skype, if you remember. So I communicated with my clients in Czech Republic via Skype, and we had Gmail and we had Google Drive. So it wasn't that difficult. But today it's completely different world. Even with AI, it's much easier.
Absolutely, the tools are fantastic. So if landlords are having experiences that, if they don't feel they're being serviced well, they need to chat to, they need to chat to yourself, don't they? Because landlords now can expect to have video and picture evidence of the condition of their properties. When they pay for work, they should see video and picture evidence of what they've paid for, that it's been completed. So this is how we build trust. When someone pays us money to do work, that contractor must provide the paperwork, must prove what's been done with videos and pictures. It's technologically easy to deliver, but so fundamental to the relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very well said, Andrew. Andrew, we are running out of time, and I know you have another meeting. Thank you very much for taking your time and going through the renter's bill as well, and all other stuff, including property management. And thank you very much. And I put the link of your webinar that you are going to send me, I hope.
I will do.
Under this video, or if you are listening on Spotify, just go to the show notes and click on the link, and you can jump right into Andrew's video. Thank you very much.
Pleasure, madam. Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
Bye now.
Díky, že jste koukali až do úplného závěru a do konce tohoto rozhovoru. Doufám, že vám rozhovor s Andrewem pomohl lépe pochopit, jak se britský nájemní trh mění a co to znamená pro vás, nebo pro nás, investory v Británii. Renters Reform Bill může být na první pohled složitý, ale s dobrým partnerem na správu nemovitostí a s jasnými informacemi to jde zvládnout. Pokud máte otázky, napište mi, nebo si rovnou se mnou domluvte videohovor. Odkaz najdete v popisku této epizody. A nezapomeňte odbírat tento podcast, ať vám neutečou další praktické rozhovory. Mějte se fajn a investicím zdar.